All right. So, there's only two ways to look at the whole of reality. There's only two ways. If there is no God, then you and everybody were spontaneously generated for no cause whatsoever. It just sort of happened. And the three things that you need to be spontaneously generated is you need an impersonal universe, because remember what spontaneous means. It means that there was no personality, no person that generated or initiated the process. And then you need a lot of that. You need chance. By the way, philosophers, if you go to any class on philosophy, do you know what chance is? Chance is nothing. There's no such a thing as chance. Chance is a word when you can't come up with a reason for something. So if you go and take a philosophy class at any reasonable university and you write chance on your paper, he's going to write an F right beside it. Because chance means nothing. But that's what people are counting on. But if you were spontaneously generated, you need an impersonal universe that does not have impersonal attention behind it. You need chance, and you need a lot of this. You need a lot of time. It took, billions of years under this rubric to create an eyeball. If you knew how complicated an eyeball was, it would, they still can't figure out how that happened. That's one way to look at the world. There's only one other way to look at the world, and that is if there is a God. And that means you have a personal world with intention, not chance. And you have a historical conclusion. In other words, it's going somewhere. If everything is this, then everything is one thing. At the end of the day, if we all came from one thing, everything is one thing. So that's why you will still hear people say, we're no different than the animals, we're just another animal. That's why PETA is so concerned, because they actually see no qualitative distinction between you and an aardvark. None. Everything is one spiritually, too. So, of course, it makes perfect sense to worship a turnip. That's called animism. That's called nature worship. It makes all the sense in the world because we're all one. So, of course, you worship earth. But the other option is the option of everything is binary. So that's where we are. Now remember, if everything is one, guess what else that means? That means there's no morality. If we are all the spontaneous generation of combustible molecules by chance over a long period of time, then can you tell me where morality came from? Because morality requires something to be above the one, right? You have to appeal to it. You have to say, child molestation is wrong. On what basis, if we're all just a bunch of spontaneously generated molecules? What will you appeal to outside of the molecules if that's all you have? By the way, you can't even have a conversation because how do you explain logic? There's no such a thing as logic. You can't appeal to logic, can you? Because that's binary. By the way, you can't actually live like this. You can say this, but you have to live. And when I say live, on a practical daily basis, you have to live like this. Because you're creating the image of God. And so, whether you deny it or not, and the way that you live your life establishes that you are created in the image of God. So that's the whole thing. If God created everything, reality means one thing. And if God did not create and you spontaneously generated out of some sort of Big Bang molecular burst, then that means reality means something else completely. And so what we're talking about tonight makes sense. Tell me, if you spontaneously generated out of nothing, why should I treat you any different than an animal? What are you going to appeal to? Why can't I be a racist? Why are you going to be able to say that that's wrong? Why? You can't.
I think the humanists say it's because it's for the benefit of all mankind.
Right, so that you can't hear that on tape, but one of the proposed answers is, well, because it benefits humanity. And to my answer to that is, where did you get the word benefit from? Benefit means there's something above the one. You're appealing to some greater good. Where'd you get that from? See, in other words, the problem is, if you came out of the primordial slime spontaneously, you don't have the grounds to appeal to anything. I have every right to be a racist in that construct. The reason, by the way, that you can't be a racist is because every person was created in the image of God. That's the proper grounds for being anti-racism, right? But if you say there's no God, I'm not sure why you can convince me I can't, it's survival of the fittest. Can't I just hate anybody I feel like? And you say, well, it's not good for us. Who said? Is that your preference? Where'd you get your preferences from? How did you come up with preferences? Preferences are just what made me survive longer than you. In fact, I'm thinking about killing you right now. I need the food. I mean, on what basis are you going to say I can't do that? There's no basis. There's zero basis. You need something above the one to say that. So that's why nobody can actually live that way. So all these positions become foolishness at the end. And they will all break down like that, and they become laughably contradictory. Because you cannot live in everyday reality like there's no God. You can claim there's no God, but you can't live that way. You can't do it. You're going to live every day of your life as if there's a God. You're going to appeal to a higher morality. How dare you lie to me? Why can't I lie to you if there's no God? Who cares about you if there's no God? I don't. What's the point?
Why do atheists get married?
Why do they get married? As near as I can tell, a state law. You know, it passes without probate. So marry a rich one. But you're exactly right. So you couldn't hear that on camera, but Larry's like, well, if you're an atheist, why get married? And the answer to that, by the way, is they don't. Statistically. By the way, we'll do marriage next week because that's what we're doing on Sunday morning with Peter. I was going to save marriage, but since we're doing it with Peter, we might as well just get it over with next week. We'll look at some of those statistics. All right, so here's what we want to talk about tonight. We want to apply all this to the gospel of social justice. Because is there anything more requested, fought for, energized, people getting angry about right now than social justice? We're going to have social justice, but there's no God. Hold on. There's no God. Right. No God. Where did you get the instinct for social justice? Where did the word justice come from if there's no God? There's no justice among the philodendrons. You know, mice are not marching for social justice. The molecular structure of the universe doesn't have placards that say, down with racism. Where did the idea come from? It came from the fact that you're creating the image of God, and even though you're lying to yourself about that, at the end of the day, the way that God gets to you is by making your life silly without Him. And so what has to happen is, in your heart, you know social justice is important. You know people are supposed to be treated well. You know you're not supposed to treat people differently. You know that racism is wrong. Everybody knows that, but only Christians can give God the credit for it. And so if you can't give God the credit for it, you're going to have to come up with a different form of righteousness. Remember, everything is counterfeit. And so that counterfeit righteousness, which you call virtue signaling, right? We have to come up with something that makes us look righteous, because we're creating the image of God. That instinct for righteousness is in every human being, and you can't get away from it. The instinct for morality, the outrage at pedophilia, the outrage at racism. Where did you get outrage from if you're just an impersonal molecule? You can only account for your outrage if there isn't a God who can be outraged. Otherwise, there's no reason for outrage at all. But they're outraged nevertheless, and that's what makes them culpable before the Lord. They will not stand before God and say, I didn't know you. He'll say, yes, you did. You were outraged. And you were actually outraged at some things that were right to be outraged about. You ought to have been outraged about racism. You ought to have been outraged about pedophilia. But you wouldn't give me credit for that, would you? You took credit for yourself. You took credit for yourself. And that's where it all breaks down. So we're going to talk a little bit about where the social justice theory came from, how it counterfeits the gospel, because it gives you a different creation story. It gives you a different sin problem. It's a counterfeit sin problem, and then it gives you a different path to redemption. How do you get saved? By being non-racist. And then what does the kingdom look like? What does the new heavens and the new earth look like? And all those things are answered differently if there's a God or if there's no God. So, ready, set, go? All right, here we go. Now, y'all want to be woke, right? We're the wokest church in America, I swear we are. I mean, no one's woke when I'm preaching, or, you know. But, and I realize everybody is at different levels of this stuff, and I know that for some of you, I'm just going to repeat information you know, but for others of you, it might be new information, so I'm just going to just walk through it simply. But woke just means what? Just means awake. And what are you awake to? You're awake to reality, but it's not the reality that God created. You're awake to a particular reality that you believe defines reality. And we're going to talk about what that is. So that's what wokeness came from. Now, wokeness, and have you all heard of critical racial theory and all that? Okay, that's very old news in philosophy. And it all came from something called critical theory, which has been around for decades and decades and decades. It's been being taught in law schools, and, you know, critical theory is just the way, what are they criticizing? Civilization, essentially, right? So all critical theory does is apply particular concepts to social structures, and tries to show what particular social structures are. And I'll give you an example of one that you've all heard of, because there's actually quite a few of these. But you all, excuse me, I apologize. You've all heard of, obviously, Marxism. And Karl Marx really went a long way with this stuff. And his position was, what was his critical theory? His critical theory was that reality is best described as economic oppression. I mean, if you're going to boil it down, I'm going to make it very simple. If you want to explain cultural reality, civilization, Karl Marx said the only way to really understand reality is if you understand it as economic oppression. And because there's economic oppression of the classes, what we can't have is this sort of binary thinking. Because binary thinking is just, what, the opiate of the masses. You know what an opiate is? It's a drug. So all God was designed to do in Marxist thought was to drug people so that they would be drunk to the idea of their oppression. And so God was just a convenient way to sort of drink you away out of your problems. You were self-medicating if you were a Christian. And what you were self-medicating about was this economic oppression. It's deep and it hurts you and it's terrible stuff. And so Karl Marx said, you know, the way that we have to solve this problem is that we have to restructure all of reality. This is where you get the word deconstruction from. So you deconstruct everything that currently is and you reconstruct it around the new reality that will solve this economic oppression that everybody experiences. And that will create utopia. That was the very first critical theory. And for the sake of time, I will just read you a summary of a historian summarizing Karl Marx, because it would take me an hour if I read through a bunch of Das Kapital for you. So I'll just read you a paragraph of a historian who I think succinctly summarizes Karl Marx, and you tell me if this doesn't describe Romans 1 to you. And when all decentralized divisions of authority have been dismantled, a globalized, classless society must take its place in a new world order. In this new world order, people will no longer have to relate to each other as superiors and inferiors, rich and poor, leader and follower. Not until there are no class divisions, no diversity, no hierarchical structure of authority will society be free of oppression. Only then will the world be rid of evil and experience utopia. That's Karl Marx. And that is over 100 years old. If you think this is new, there's nothing new under the sun, trust me. It's all new. So everything is a false gospel. The sin is oppression. The created narrative where you were spontaneously generated out of a molecular chance, and that spontaneous generation was survival of the fittest. Remember, Karl Marx was a great fan of Charles Darwin. Why? Because survival of the fittest is what created all these class oppressions and class warfare. And so the only way to solve the problems of humanity was to make sure that we got rid of everything that spoke of authority and hierarchy, everything that was binary. There's nothing hierarchical, right? And we're going to get rid of all that, and we're going to have the whole of civilization, all of civilization be completely equal economically, and this will create utopia on earth. The new heavens and the new earth will be economic equality, which is utopia. Now that's Karl Marx in about 2 minutes. All right. Everybody okay with that? Have you heard? I bet you've heard that before. Well, look, we have kids right now, Nancy. Nancy's comment was, well, hasn't communism been tried? And it has, and it's failed in every civilization in the world. It's resulted in millions and millions of deaths. Under Stalin, it's just been a horrible thing. But we've raised a generation that doesn't even know about the Vietnam War, so they're not actually aware of history. You know, I mean, it's a sad thing, but you know, if you send a kid to school and you don't teach him history, but you teach him, you know, he's supposed to be equal, you know, he'll be a fool the rest of his life. You know, so homeschool your kids. Anyway, so that's Karl Marx. Now, critical race theory is just a permutation, a subset of Karl Marx's critical theory. That's all it is. And all it did was take class oppression and inject into it that particular oppression is really not economic, it's racial. And in other words, It's true, of course, that there is economic oppression, but the real and satisfactory rationale for that, how they got to be economically oppressed, was because they were a priori racially oppressed. All right? So it was just an add-on to race theory, and that's how we got critical race theory. All right? And you've heard a lot about that. And that's the world you're sitting in right now. And I'll read you a couple excerpts from White Fragility and some of the most famous books that are guiding this. All of our corporations have already gone down this road. They're injecting it. All of our state governments are requiring people to be trained to account for this. And so let me let you know what this is, and then we'll talk about the gospel and how it applies to it. So CRT, critical race theory, says this, that all society is simply structured around racial power dynamics. That's, if you want to explain reality, that's how you explain reality. Everything is structured on that. And let me ask you, remember what we talked about common grace? Because people are created in the image of God, they'll get some things right and some things wrong, right? So, how many races are there? Where did that answer come from? Thank you. There's one. They're right about that. That's true. There's one race, the human race. We all came from Adam. That's why, by the way, if you do one of those DNA things, you're always like, man, I came from everywhere. Because you did. There's no way, I mean, you know, you might get a little more Irish thrown in or something, but honestly, you're from everywhere. That's because we all came from Adam. So we are one race. And so critical race theory understands that. They understand that race is a social construct, but systemic racism is where they say that the entire civilized order has been defined by that and been infected by it. So, and this all came about, obviously, again, it all starts with Darwin saying that, you know, there's no God and this is all survival of the fittest, and we all got here by luck and chance. And that means that we all had to fight for survival and do this, that, and the other thing. And Marx picked up on that and said, well, okay, that just means there's going to be people who oppress other people. They're going to be stronger apes and weaker apes. And so we have to, you know, we have to account for that. And now, critical race theory simply says race is the best way to stand that. So America now, if you say it, America is structured around a rigged system. And that rigged system is that if you are white, you have a built-in racism that probably is actually invisible to you. You may not even know that you're a racist, and this will shock you to find out, but it's important that you learn that you are. And because it is so structured into the system, only white people could win. So that's critical race theory, sort of in a nutshell. It's an invisible problem, and the way you solve this invisible problem, and the only way to solve it, is that you become anti-racist. And the way you do that is that you constantly admit that you're a racist. And then work really hard. By the way, this is works righteousness applied to racism. And work really, really hard. There's no grace in the system, believe me, because you're never getting off the hook. You work really, really hard and establish, you know, that you're going to, you know, be a better non-racist. You know, there's a lot of ways to do that. But you won't win in any way. What is at the root of the structure of all oppression, whether you're talking about critical race theory or Marxist economic theory, what is at the root of that idea? That the world is structured around what? Power. That's the root idea. The key, the center, the core of all of the universe is a power grab. It's a power game. And of course it must be a power game because we're all here by spontaneous generation, and the only reason that our genes survived and the poor schlep who didn't survive, his genes didn't survive, is because we have more power. We're stronger. It's the survival of the fittest applied to economic theory and to social constructs. That's all this is. It's nothing more complicated than that. There's nothing more complicated than that. So the world is not based on grace. The world is not based on a loving Heavenly Father who takes care of His people. The world is based on power and oppression. And of course, that makes perfect sense if we came from, time and chance and a molecular explosion. If that were true, it would be. And so, you have to say that is the logical conclusion to your premise. Your premise is there's no God. Your premise is you got here by spontaneous generation. Your premise is that evolution best explains reality. Then you're absolutely right. It's about oppression. What you're absolutely wrong is about is that you have no moral standing to tell me I can't do it to you. And when they do that, what they do is they jump over to the Christian side, and they go take money out of the Christian bank and spend it on themselves. Because you can only get morality if there's a God who's moral. Molecules aren't moral. Molecules have no moral structure. You'll need a moral God for that. Everything else is just stuff human beings make up. So they'll say, why don't you check your white privilege? And my answer to that is, why don't you check your resentment? I have no moral reason without a God to give a rip about your life. You better hope there's a God. Because only God will give me the moral standing to love you, care for you, bring you in, help you, minister to you when you're wounded. If there's no God, I'm going to finish you off as fast as I can. You can't have it both ways. So there is no social justice. There's no ability for justice without a God. Yet, everybody created in God's image, and everybody knows that they want justice, and so they seek it. But you're not going to win. You're not going to win at all. So let's talk about this false gospel a little bit more. So remember, everything is structured around a false gospel. Any questions about that so far? We good? Yeah? All right. Don't worry, we'll get to the gospel. All right, so everything. Remember what God offers. God gives good news. That's the gospel, right? So God says, this is reality, I made it, and I've got good news for you. I'm going to superintend it, I'm going to be the overseer of your soul, I'm going to be the shepherd of your heart, I'm going to protect you, I'm going to feed you, I'm going to make sure you're taken care of, I'm going to make it, all things work together for good to them that love the Lord and are called according to His purpose. And every human being in the world wants that, but they don't want the God who also says, oh no, by the way, you'll have to serve me for that. So if you reject God, though, it's not that, remember what G.K. Chesterton said. He said, if you reject God, it's not that you worship nothing, it's that you worship everything. Because you were created in His image, you have to have values deep in your heart. And you're going to find a place to put that. And so what you'll come up with is an alternate gospel. You'll say, there is good news about this particular form of reality. And so you'll have to make up good news, just like Karl Marx did. If we can just knock down all the economic barriers and oppression, if we can get rid of all authority structures, by the way, have you noticed that all the people that want to get rid of all authority structures are the people in charge of getting rid of all authority structures? Isn't that convenient how that works out? I'm just like, wow, that's a good deal. So it's all authority except them. By the way, this is why it always leads to tyranny, 100% of the time. And historically it's always led to tyranny. Because you can't get away from authority structures because it's hardwired into God's world. Because he is the authority. And so by nature he's going to have little authorities, right? Because he's the big one. So we're going to have an alternate gospel. And so our alternate gospel is going to have our four things, right? It's going to be, what is the creation story? So the creation story around wokeness is that we are all not alike, and this needs to change. We are not one race. We're actually multiple races. And some races are more sinful than others. In fact, some races are sinful just by the fact that they're that race. And I'm going to read you a quote. If you're white, you're a sinner, period. And if you're black, you cannot sin. That's a cool deal. I kind of wish I was born black, if that's true.
It's not.
Oh. Thank you, Carolyn. I was worried. So the gospel needs to be that we need to flatten out all of what looks like the distinctions, because those distinctions are not going to help us. We need, therefore, to have equity. So equity means that there are equal outcomes. Everything has to look the same. And that's the only way to solve this problem. So the creation narrative becomes something completely different. The DNA process becomes a social sort of construct for them. We're not all one race. Some races are better than other races, and we have to fix that. The sin problem is sort of embedded in the story, right? The sin problem is embedded in the story. The sin, of course, is white supremacy. And that white supremacy is structural. And what structural means is it's so in the system is so rigged that the average white person doesn't even know this. They've been privileged. And because you've been privileged as a white person, then by nature, that privilege has to be removed, whether or not you know it. Whether or not you know it. And so that, that's the key. Let's see if I can find a quote for you here, just so you don't think I'm just blowing smoke. I mean, I thought I had... Where is my quotes? Well... and I'm quoting now White Fragility, which is probably the preeminent textbook for this. It's the one used all over corporations in America. It's, this woman is making a gazillion dollars, $30,000, $40,000 a pop to go into IBM and places like that to teach people how racist they are. And so I'm quoting directly from page 22 of White Fragility. When I say that only whites can be racist, I mean that in the United States, only whites have the collective social and institutional power and privilege over people of color. People of color do not have this power and privilege over white people. That's the basic structure of what you're dealing with critical race theory. So essentially what that means is, if I can put it this way, it is to say that one man, by virtue of his skin color and no other reason, cannot commit sin. Cannot commit sin, while another man, by virtue of his skin color and no other reason, cannot avoid committing the same sin. That's the problem. I've got great news for you and it's good news and bad news.
We're sitting down right here.
Yeah, yes, I know, so here we go. The good news is that you are not a sinner because you're white. The bad news is you're a sinner because you're human. The unavoidable consequence of humanity is sin. And there's no way around it. And all this is, you know, if you can get people to buy in this, you can exempt yourself from being a sinner. This is power. This is a power grab. So if I can exempt myself from being a sinner just because of I was born with a particular skin color, that's a good deal for me. You probably have to pay me reparations. You know, someone's going to have to pay for this. Someone's going to have to treat me differently. I'm not a sinner. I'm sinless. And you are a sinner because you're white. It's clear. And so we're going to have to change. We're going to have to deconstruct the social reality and reconstruct it around this new idea of privilege and what it means. So the redemptive solution is precisely that everything changes. And there's Ibram Kendi. This is a very big name in critical race theory. He's written books and things like that. And again, so I just want to quote him. Don't want to be, you know, accused of not quoting people. And I'm quoting him now. More white people are finally beginning to realize how white supremacy and how even whiteness itself is killing them. Sin is not killing you, your whiteness is. That's your problem. It literally is posing an existential threat to humanity. Do you know what that means? Do you know what an existential threat to humanity is? Whiteness is going to ruin all of humanity. It will be destroyed. Well, what are you going to have to do if all of humanity gets destroyed? Aren't you going to have to save it? Yes, you are. It will be the right thing to do. That will be the only redemption. Because we can't have that destroyed, can we? And whiteness is destroying it. And so fundamentally, anti-racism is life. It literally is. It can save humanity. So there's your redemption. So, you know, I like to quote from the sources. I like to quote from the sources. So the creation narrative becomes a different creation narrative, how you got here, which means you live in a different reality, right? That's what the creation narrative tells you. What reality do you live in? And what reality you live in tells you what your problem is. Because if the reality you live in is so infected with racial oppression, then the sin problem is going to be the whiteness that creates that. And the only redemption, the only way to save humanity as a whole is to get rid of whiteness. It's got to go. And the way we're going to start with that is economically and socially. Now, if you want to buy into that, go right ahead, but I'm not on board. Sorry. Wokeness, there's your solution to racial discrimination. It's anti-racist discrimination. I mean, do you see how you can't eliminate discrimination? See, I know how we're going to solve discrimination. We're going to make sure we discriminate against the right people. Does that sound like the gospel to you? It doesn't. But you see, you have to make up other good news, and you have to make up another truth narrative. So what becomes truth in redemption? Social narrative becomes truth. Because there's no God, what he has said is irrelevant, and because whiteness is infected and diseased, and has got us to the problems that we have arrived at in our world, then the only true redemption is a reconstituting of the social structure. Now, do you know why Black Lives Matter is burning everything down? That's why. You pull down the statues, you burn it down. And you cannot deconstruct it enough. You can't kill it enough. You can't get rid of it enough. And you got to keep doing it until everything changes. And the only solution is that you get in power. And when we get in power, we'll do better. Yeah, all right, I know. All right, so what is the kingdom? Let me see, I thought I might have another, because, no, I guess I read you all my cool quotes. All right, so now we have to have a kingdom, and the kingdom is going to be a society where all the money has been paid back, and all organizations, all social structures have eliminated white participation. Now that's in writing. All you gotta do is go read it. And the problem is, I can't get anybody to read. So you think I make it up. The books are on the shelves. Just go read them. No one's shy about this. No one. This is being taught in your governments. This is being taught in your corporations. This is being taught in your schools. And so you're taking a 5-year-old kid and you're saying that by virtue of the fact, young man or young lady, because you are white, you are evil. And you need to think of yourself as evil. And you need to think of ways to solve that problem. What do you think that does to a 5-year-old psyche? Yeah, I mean, they're damaged for life. They're damaged for life. So that is the kind of thinking that sin will generate. And I know that no one wants to talk about it because you don't want to be called racist. I double dog dare you to call me a racist. I spent the last 30 years in Philadelphia, which is 40% black. You don't think I've had this conversation? I am not afraid of the conversation. Believe me. This is foolishness and it's sin. And the drive for power and the drive that says I'm so resentful that I have to take things back. No one who is currently alive today has ever been a slave. We haven't had a slave in this country in 150 years, so none of you were slave owners. So this is nonsense and you have to stop living lies. And this is just one category. If you keep living lies every day and keep nodding your head to lies, and we're going to do a lie a week here, pretty soon you don't know up from down, and you can't think anymore. The only way you'll learn to think is to have your mind renewed by Christ and allow the gospel to teach you what is true about the nature of reality, and then stick with it. Never quit, never back down. I don't care if they burn you at the stake. They've done that to Christians before. I don't care if they throw you into the lion's den. They've done that to Christians before. What you cannot do is compromise the gospel of Jesus Christ, because this isn't about being a racist. This is about whether or not you're going to be reconciled to your Creator. And that matters. That matters. So the gospel of the kingdom looks completely different than this, doesn't it? So all we want to do is counteract this and say, what is the truth? What is the real gospel? How are we going to think? And that's really important, all right? Any questions? We all good? No, see, we're on camera. No one's, I wasn't even there. Honestly. Don't worry, I'll get you strong. You'll be all right. Yeah, I mean, you're living in a culture that will believe anything. Honestly. Look you right in the eye, lie to you, and you're like, yeah, that's great. That's absolutely right, sure. And they expect you, and you nod your head because you're afraid of the argument. You can't be. You got to look at me and say, you know what, you're just crazy. There's your problem, you're crazy. If you knew what time it was, you probably wouldn't be this crazy, but you are. And I just call a fool a fool. There's my apologetic strategy. You're stupid. What do you want me to say? You want me to say? Say, yeah, but Christians are supposed to be nice. The nicest thing I can do for you right now is point out how much of an idiot you are. It's the nicest thing I can do. I will make your life long and healthy once you recognize that. But if you don't recognize it, you'll be a fool the rest of your life, and like all the other lemmings, you're going to be jumping off the cliff, destroying yourself. So an act of love is, I'm going to save you from your own foolishness. I mean, honestly. You know, I used to lifeguard at Long Lake Bible Camp. Al knows where that is. Long Lake Bible Camp in Naples, Maine, right? And I'd be sitting up on the chair, you know, because I was looking good. I had the orange shorts with a little cross on it. And I was tanned, you know. Had the hair, David Cassidy shag, looking really good. And sure enough, some kid, I'd see some kid running down towards the dock, and I'd say, whoa, blow the whistle. Can you swim? Oh, yeah. Takes a diving leap right off, and I'm in the water after him a minute later, because he cannot swim. That is your culture right now. They actually think they can swim, and they are going to go right to the bottom. And Christianity is the only thing that's going to save them. And you know, if it wasn't so sad, you know, it would just be uproariously funny. But these people are going to lose their lives to utter destruction over some of this stuff. It's just maddening to think. So let's talk about the gospel, of the real gospel. Because this is the only thing that keeps you tethered. Right? This is all that keeps you from flying away. This keeps the boat moored. and you know, if you don't have this, you're in trouble. You were created in God's image, number one. Which means you're not here by chance. Which means you're significant. Which means you're important. Which means you have purpose. Which means that there are answers besides what your culture is offering you. And I say that to everybody right after I get done calling them stupid. Because that's what they're stupid about. They're stupid to think that they have no purpose. They're stupid to believe that they're just a collection of random molecules. They're stupid to believe that there's purpose in life unless they're created in the image of God. But if they will accept that the real problem is that they're alienated from their Creator, that's the real problem. It's not that you can't find your identity, you know, the real me, I've lost it, so I have to search high and low to get it, and I'll try this and I'll try that. No, your real problem is you're searching for that God-sized hole in your heart, and unless God fills it, you're always going to be empty. You know, our hearts are restless until they rest in Thee. It's really that simple. And when that happens, you have meaning, you have purpose, and every human being on the face of the planet becomes singularly important. And I can tell them that. I've got great news for you. You're not what you think you are. You have purpose. You're significant. You're loved. Someone cares for you. Someone's worried about where you're going next. This all isn't an accident. There's a way out. There's hope. That's the gospel. That's the gospel. And if you start with that, you can get them to the next problem, because the problem is alienation. Now, no one's going to argue in this day and age that they don't feel alienated. It's just that they don't recognize that their ultimate alienation is from their Creator. They feel alienated in every other capacity, and nothing will solve the problem. We're the most medicated culture because we're alienated from ourselves. We have to change our sexual identity because I'm alienated from myself. I can't find the real me. It's got to be in there somewhere, and so it's got to be something else. I'm alienating from my family. I don't even talk to them anymore. You know, we don't have nuclear family anymore because family has gone... Do you realize, think about this. There was 9 in 1,000 divorces in 1960. 1960. 9 in 1,000. And in a 30-year period, that number went to 500 in 1,000. How did that happen after 2,000 years of human history? How did in 30 years did it change that fast? Everything I just showed you tonight. Because we're in a pocket of stupidity, and it's going to be a pocket of God's judgment. And so families are breaking down. They're alienated from each other. They can't get along. So they feel the alienation. But what they don't realize is that their ultimate alienation, the reason they feel all these other alienations is because their primary alienation is they're alienated from their Creator. And once you solve that problem, the other alienations also get reconciled. But if you don't, if you're trying to reconcile, get the right race to be in charge and the wrong race to be out of charge, if you're trying to say, well, we can't live along as a family, so we'll make up new definitions of family and see if that works. If they're saying, I'm alienated from my own body, so I'll just try another gender on to see if that works. All of that's going to end up in a way that they will not flourish. Because the real problem is alienation from their Creator, and all these other small a alienations are just symptoms of that disease. And once you can show people that, you can give them hope. Say, you know what? This thing might be a little bit bigger than, I don't seem to have a family at home. Or I don't know what my sexual identity is. Or, apparently I'm a racist. Maybe there's something bigger than that. And that's what we have to get to. God's people are not oppressed, but they come from every tribe, tongue, and nation. Can you read that? I'm hoping that's enough of a Bible verse that you remember it. God is not in the business of separating the races. He's in the business of bringing them together. From out of every tribe, tongue, and nation will I call my people. You're not a sinner because of your DNA. You're a sinner because you have rejected God, your Creator. And the minute you reject your Creator, everything else breaks. Because you don't know why you exist anymore. It's really simple. If I build a chair, I know why the chair exists. I know how the chair got there. I know exactly what moved I made on the lathe with it. I know what the templates I used. I know every dowel in that chair. I know exactly how that chair will withstand certain weights and certain forces on it. I understand how that chair will react in the weather because I put one kind of varnish on it and not another. I understand everything about that chair. And that's how God is with you. But if that chair thinks, I made myself, that chair's not going to last long. I mean, I'm going to put the axe to it. Anyway, but that chair's not going to last long. That's a horrible example. But you understand the point I'm making? The point I'm making is we don't have enough intelligence to keep creating ourselves like this. And once you deny your Creator, you have to recreate yourself every single day of your life. Which is why we're all self-medicating, which is why we are all so full of anxiety, which is why in the last 100 years, no one ever heard of a psychologist until this last century. No one ever thought about getting a divorce hardly till this last century. Look where it's all gone. And it all started when someone said, God didn't create all this. You got here by spontaneous combustion, and it's survival of the fittest. That's where it all started, right there. And people started believing that nonsense. And look what happened. And now it's going to be survival of the fittest. And I'm telling you, pay attention. So it's always God's people that are going to be brought together. That's the solution. And how are we brought together? Are we brought together with a power grab, or are we brought together with grace? Grace. Power is bottom up, right? Power is humans doing whatever they can do to grab power and to try to, get back in the saddle. And that, if that means I have to grab your money and grab your company and grab everything about you, then I'll do it. But you see, the way that we're restored as a people is through God's grace to us, not our power grabs with each other. The gospel is that the God of love and the God of kindness, in His mercy, granted grace to people who don't deserve it. And that grace puts us in the same room together and makes us care for one another. And without God in the room, it's going to be nothing but fighting and power plays. Because that's all that will be left. That's all that will be left. And then finally, the gospel, and I always say, I just call this kingdom, because kingdom has already started, as you know, because you've been around here long enough to know that. But remember what Karl Marx said was, what is utopia? When humans figure out how to flatten out hierarchy and authority. And God says, the new heavens and the new earth, my utopia is when we actually worship authority. Mine. Because I'm the God of grace. Do you see the difference? And if you keep these four things in your head, what is the creation narrative? How did you get here? What is the sin problem? What is the redemption? What is the solution to that problem? And what utopia does it take you to? Does it take you to some human globalist with, a reduction in the population because there are too many mouths to feed? Or does it take you to the new heavens and the new earth where He spreads a table and says, come and dine. We have limitless food for everybody. That's the gospel. And if you'll keep those four things in your head, everything you see in the newspaper, you'll be able to just tick off those four things and say, that's not the gospel. I reject it. But it won't make you smug. It will make you offer to people who desperately need the love and grace of Jesus Christ, or they're going to keep making decisions that destroy themselves. It will. Does that make sense? All right, next week we'll do the lie of marriage and Christian marriage versus the marriage of your culture. All right, let's pray. Lord, we thank you that you have not lied to us. You are the God of truth. And because you're the God of truth, we can have truth. We can know truth. We don't have to be in doubt about truth. And so I pray tonight that you will fill us with your truth, because you are the way, and you are the truth, and you are the life. And in filling us with your light, help us to distinguish the darkness and to stamp out darkness so that people might be saved and not destroyed. We pray these things for Christ's sake. Amen.